Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is Monday, so it's the Switch Monday. Chase and Alex are here, and we're discussing Outwitting the Devil, one of my favorite books by Napoleon Hill. Chase, take it away.
All right, thanks, Shrikant. So, welcome to the Switch. This is week 4 of Outwitting the Devil, and as always, I'm going to do my best to do like a 60-second summary of the book. For anybody who's joining us for the first time, here's how it's going to go. I'll give a summary of the book, and then last week, the audience was tasked with an exercise, and actually Alex and I completed it too. So we were all tasked with an exercise that was supposed to focus in on one of the principles from this book. And then after we sort of recap and talk about the exercise, we will get into this week's principle, as well as an exercise for this week. Now, principles, exercises, why is all that important? Here's why. Outwitting the Devil was written by Napoleon Hill. He wrote Think and Grow Rich. It's a pretty famous book, sort of launched the self-development book genre. And he also wrote this book, Outwitting the Devil, which, in contrast to Think and Grow Rich, which was sort of more about the paths to success, Outwitting the Devil elucidates the paths to failure, and more specifically, and more importantly in my mind, the paths away from failure and into success. Now, it's framed as a conversation between the devil and Mr. Earthbound, who is Napoleon Hill. And in the conversation, the devil talks about all the ways that he causes people to do what he calls drifting. And that is drifting away from your goals, drifting away from your ideal self, drifting away from what you want from life and into discontent, into, sort of things you don't want from life. There are many mechanisms that he uses to do this to people. He talks about taking advantage of their natural desires and leading them astray. He talks about distracting them with things that seem appealing, in an expedient manner, and the meaningful stuff goes by the wayside. He talks about all these things. But he also talks about the principles that help you become a non-drifter. And that's what we're going through in these 12 weeks. We've got 11 principles for how to ensure that you are not drifting in life. And so last week's principle was decide definitely what you want from life. Then create a plan for attaining it and be willing to sacrifice everything else, if necessary, rather than accept permanent defeat. Now, the exercise for last week was to describe in detail your ideal self. And we gave some ways to do that because that's a tall task. And then identify the gap between you and that person. The thought being, at some point, you will become your future self, whether it's ideal or not, that's sort of up to you. But you do theoretically have this ideal self, and there's a gap between you and your ideal self. What does that gap look like? Why are you not your ideal self today? And then step 3 was identify the steps that you need to take to close that gap and what you might need to sacrifice in order to achieve your ideal self. Now, again, we had a deep conversation about that subject last week, and Alex and I are going to start by talking about our experiences with the exercise, and then we'll open it up to you. For anybody who was here last week or who read the description and did the exercise from last week, the one that I just described, please put in the chat if you're willing to spend 2 minutes giving us your takeaways from the exercise. And then when Alex and I are done, we'll go ahead and call on you. We'll hit, 2, 3 people, depends on how the discussion goes, because this week we've got a whole new principle and a whole new exercise to talk about. So if you're new here, sit tight. You're going to hear about the cool stuff that happens after you embody these principles. You're going to hear about what it's like to go through these exercises from some people, and we're going to move on to the next principle. So, Alex, can you start us off? What was your experience with doing the exercise from last week? And maybe if you want to give us any of the description of your ideal self that you came up with, as much as you would like to share.
Yeah, thanks, Chase. So I answered this in a little bit more of a theoretical way than outlining specific, for example, goals. Because I feel like these goals that I project, that I want, always shift in time. And that's not the unchanging future self that I want. I don't know if in 10 years I'm going to want to be doing the same career goal, but I do know what type of person I'll want to be. And I think I wrote out my ideal self is in some ways no different from my current self. If I had to list the traits that I want, I think I already have them. But the difference is in consistency. I want to reliably display my best traits to myself and others. I want to be able to call upon my most compassionate self, which is already inside me, whenever it serves the needs of myself and others. I want to be able to conjure my energetic drive for creativity whenever it would be of value. My ability to listen to others and develop wisdom whenever that's needed. I want to exude positivity on a consistent basis and not just when things are going well for me. I want to always find joy in others people's success and find the ability to not see arbitrary boundaries between me and the rest of the world. And through my habits, I've touched on and started to develop all of these traits. But I think they're still somewhat foreign. They don't have a totally innate and natural feel necessarily. Some of them more than others, but some I know will take more work. And I'll likely always fall prey to drifting habits at some point or another. And to be honest, my ideal self still would occasionally, although very rarely, fall into those habits because I do think that those are such an important learning experience for me. And something like when I have a moment of failure or I do something I'm not proud of or I go through a really hard time, that's what knocks me out of a rut or stagnation or drifting, whatever it is, and really motivates me to live with right action. So I think to get there, it's partially by continuing to do what I've already done, the habits that I've seen start to bring me to this ideal self, and to cultivate the right community, the people around me who will help to cultivate these traits and keep the traits that I already have, and basically just continue not drifting, and especially when we're thinking of in terms of this book, thinking about it from the not doing the bad thing and sticking with the, not necessarily having it to be perfect all the time, but as long as I'm not getting worse, it's like if you're thinking of a slope, it's going to be somewhere in there, even if it's going up very slowly. That's okay. Sometimes it's going to be going up higher. I just don't want to be going down.
So I have at least one question for you. I think, it sounds like you've solidified, or you were able to describe in actually pretty good detail a lot of the more like trait side of things, the character side of things. One of the ways that I think helps some people, and maybe not everybody, achieve certain character traits and things like that, is to materialize and metricize those things. Is that in any way how you operate? I mean, if not, this is totally cool. But if you've noticed that metricizing things helps you, can you think of any way to do that for the ideal future Alex that you've just described?
I don't know about metricizing the behaviors themselves, but I do metricize the habits that cultivate those.
Can you talk about any of the metrics for that?
So, for example, meditation, that's something that has led me always in a positive direction that I want my ideal self to have. And I don't know what that will bring, but I know that's a habit of my ideal self. So let's say let's say I haven't meditated at all for a year, right? Let's take a big chunk of time. To me, it's just finding a metric that is now better than none a year, right? Obviously, I want to do a lot better than that, but leading myself through. I mean, I guess it's pretty simple. Just doing it more than I did the week before. That just the principle of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As far as the other things, I mean, I'm trying to think. Like I wouldn't know how to necessarily quantify or metricize something like finding joy in somebody else's success, right? Like, I guess it would be a yes or no type thing, and just hopefully end up more with the yes than the no.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if you were asking me the question, how do I quantify something like that, I would say something like your journaling habit is already a way to measure that, and a way to reflect on, are you finding joy? I mean, you can even just like add that in every day and have, as much as it is a subjective metric, it's still a metric. It's still quantifying something. So, that's always an option.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, and just to be specific, the traits, the habits that I think have gotten me here are meditation, journaling, exercise, helping others, and just really making the most of my time. So
Nice. Awesome. All right, cool. I'll talk about mine real quick. So I kind of started at the other end. There's this idea that I actually heard from Shrikant at one point of creative analytical shuttling, which I think is a really good tool for certain processes. And I think while I think Alex's ended up being a description more on the side that fits well into a prose description, it's sort of a more subjective, almost feeling oriented description. I tried to focus on like almost a character sheet, D&D character sheet style description. And I mean, maybe they don't totally fit into those categories. That's just what my subconscious fed me to try to explain it. So, for things on mine, I have things like, what am I going to be doing occupation wise? What is my net worth? What is my ideal weight? What are my habits and routines, like down to numbers? And, what am I doing daily? What am I doing weekly? What kinds of food am I eating? How much am I reading? How much am I meditating? How much am I exercising? What kind of exercise? Like, I tried to get really granular in those details and put as many numbers and rates and things like that as I could. And I also ended up with this giant list of traits and skills, and I was trying to sort through them. Unfortunately, I did not have time to fully sort through them, but I think they fall into a couple of categories that almost branch out hierarchically. And maybe what I'll do is I'll sort them on my own and post that, or we can talk about it at a future date. But just to pick out a few, I pulled some categories from some characters. For example, if anybody's seen the TV show The Unit, that is my favorite TV show. And the character Bob Brown in there, he is brave. He's dedicated to his mission and his team. He's a family man. And those are things that I admire, that I think I would like to be able to describe my ideal future self under those terms. Pulling from some other characters and situations, I ended up with traits and things like mindful, articulate, disciplined, equanimous, virtuous, interested in deep understanding of people and ideas, emotionally strong and supportive, financially stable, expert in my craft, and these things, they fall into several different categories, but I have them in a big list now. So I think for me, the exercise felt like a great first step. I don't feel done. I feel like this document needs to evolve and it needs to transform over time. And I think the big indicator for me that that's the case is that I didn't get a good grasp on steps 2 and 3. I didn't feel like I could actually identify the gap very well between where I am now and where I am then, other than like really obvious things. So like, for example, my ideal future self is ambitious. How ambitious? I don't know. am I being ambitious in an ideal way now, or do I need to be more ambitious? That's a good question. My sense is that I need to be more ambitious, but I want to know more about that gap. And at the same time, I don't want to get stuck over analyzing because I want to, lead into action. But those are sort of my thoughts from it. I felt like it was a helpful exercise, but it just felt like a first step. It didn't feel like, it almost didn't feel like enough.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I like how you broke it down into more kind of tangible, adjectives and descriptors. I agree. It doesn't feel like enough because, especially, I think mine is a little bit too vague, but it also, I think, will last longer. Does that make sense? So I think a lot of when I think about the specifics of when I go into specifics, I think that's probably more useful day to day in thinking like I am this type of person.
Yeah.
Because that's what I think. I think when I think I am creative or something, it's like that will help me just not worry and judge what I'm creating because I just have that assumption and I flow with it.
Yeah.
For me, the more kind of specific stuff, that's what I really use my journal for because like you said, it evolves, it changes day to day and it's an ongoing document. And I think one of the reasons I wrote it like this is because I have such a predisposition to quantify and find those type of things. And I've had varying success with that method. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's get some feedback from some people. First up, we've got Joe, followed by Steven. So Joe, let us know your experience and what you got from it.
So I'll be very brief. I broke it down into two categories. In the categories that I broke them down into were how I interact with others, and then what are my goals. And I kind of saw some links between the idea of self-care and how that actually impacted how I interacted with others. So one of the examples was, how I interact with others. I had underneath there the idea of ethics, helping others, caring for others, and some of the self-care things that I have under myself is that maintaining my composure kind of impacts that. Maintaining my emotions impacts how I interact with others. And then I actually did think about some of the metrics as far as, my ideal self too, it's some of the things that you guys have already said. You talked about the idea of, and one other thing that I measured how it impacts, there's a crossover, is the idea of self-compassion and how that impacts how I interact with others as well. So some of these metrics that I have actually directly impact how I interact with everyone else. And that's a really important thing that I noticed, because then I could start to develop specific tasks that kind of answers both categories. And meditation being one of those, healthy being exercising. And yes, I too am not complete with my list or my plan, but this has given me a really good framework and a starting place. I mean, some of these things are are going to be a little bit difficult to come up with metrics, but one of them is just, become a little bit more faster in my reading and become a little bit more productive. So how I measure that is actually a bit of a challenge, because depending if I'm taking on like Maps of Meaning as a book versus some other book, it really doesn't measure. Like I can't say I read this many books or I did this many things, because I have to start to account for the difficulty of the tasks that I'm taking on. So that's where I ran into a little bit of difficulty, is developing some specific metrics that account for the level of challenges that I'm taking on. But this gave me it was very therapeutic for me, I can say. And it really helped me outline some of my emotions that I can account for in my journal that would actually directly impact how I interact with others. So if I got angry a number of times in the day, that directly impacts not only me, but it also impacts how I interact with other people. And that's a way of prioritizing it. Like, I can't do that. So, because, one of my top goals, again, is the idea, well, of helping others. And so with that, I kind of see the connection between self-care and my interactions with others. So I'll leave it
Yeah.
at that.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. All right, Stephen, you are up.
Hello. So I wasn't too sure if I was going to share, but then after listening to you, Alex, I can really relate to what you were saying and think of my,
Stephen, could you speak into the mic? We're barely able to hear you.
oh, sorry, I had to turn up my volume. Is that better? Okay, so Alex, what you had to say resonated with me because I too feel like I'm my ideal self. And rather than thinking of it as my ideal self, Napoleon Hill refers to our other self. And perhaps that's what you're talking about here. And it's not necessarily something that doesn't exist within us, but is already part of us and we have to acknowledge. So, and of course, I'm always trying to improve and how I can be better. And I do that, fill the gap, as you would say, through meditation and other things. But at first, I approached the exercise as trying to think of people that I admire. And the two people that came to mind were Dave Chappelle, who hosted last Saturday night's SNL, and Barack Obama, maybe because they're in the news now on TV. But I admire them for their confidence and intelligence, especially in the way they present themselves verbally. Um, Dave Chappelle admitted in his monologue that he was scared and nervous, and whether that's really true or not, I'm not too sure. Um, After all, he's a comedian, and perhaps he was joking. Um, and he's also much taller and bigger than me. So when thinking about the gap between who I strive to be, sometimes I think, well, you can't carry yourself like that unless you are really big and tall, though Obama isn't necessarily. So that's not necessarily the case. And I, like most people, have self-doubts, and that's normal. One can strive to be their ideal self, but sometimes those, well, okay, now I'm thinking, maybe the ideal, you have to realize what the ideal is, because sometimes it's not attainable if it is to be as well known as either those two people or whoever it might be. So that's what I have to say.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. That makes me think that I want to repeat a point that I started to make last week, but that I think is worth making again. And that is that the point of understanding or coming to know your ideal future self isn't to shoot for something that you think you can achieve. That's like I was listening to a podcast called The Unraveling, and they were talking about how when the United States invaded Iraq, and there were, in the initial invasion, there were people like all over waving American flags. And then at some point, the Al Qaeda made some move that sort of took back some territory, and all of a sudden people threw their flags away. And even when the American troops came back into that territory, the people weren't waving the flags, because it wasn't that the people were happy necessarily that Americans were there. They were betting on who they thought would win. And, people vote not for who they think is best, but for who they think will win. And I think in this ideal self exercise, you have to do the opposite of that. You can't create an ideal self that's something that, this is what I think I can achieve. The point of creating an ideal, a picture of your ideal self, is almost for it to be unattainable, so that you always have a direction to move in. So that, and of course, I'm not saying this is easy, because falling short is never easy, but of course you will fall short of an ideal. But I kind of think that's the point. And so I would encourage anybody who felt like they were struggling between what I want to describe as my ideal self and what I think I can achieve, to almost throw out the what I think I can achieve in favor of putting the ideal together and then identifying the steps so that you actually can achieve. And I think, to be honest, I think that's the only way that you can achieve more than you thought you could achieve, is by aiming higher than you think you can get. So I tried to make that point last week, and I know there are many ways to make that point, but I hope that resonates with people. I hope that makes sense. I hope my analogy made sense. I know that felt like a tangent, but
And Chase, if you might mind if I put something on that, I think
sure.
Some of the things that came to my mind when you were saying that is, it's important that these are like your own goals, because when you feel like there are things that society or other people put on you, lofty goals can be not so healthy. And it's the difference between being told what to do and deciding to do it. And that's the thing. I'm not going to fall into, being upset with myself if I don't achieve the thing I set up to do. But if somebody else told me to do it and I failed, the kind of emotions that would follow would be all negative. Whereas it would be reflective if I would set it up for myself as a kind of a test. So I think the fact is that the more we can take for ourselves to create our own direction and change those emotions from trying to have people tell us in what direction and how high we're supposed to go, and turn that around and have it be our own goal, that I think that's one of the ways that we can become more successful. Because when you fail in this context, you're excited because now you know how to, and we're going to talk about this, how to do better next time. Where instead of just feeling, I failed them, I did poorly, I should have done better, it can be a totally different mindset.
Yeah, and how do you know if your goal is something that society has set you up to think is your goal or your own? Well, maybe there's a podcast episode about thinking your own thoughts that you should go back to. That was one of the previous principles. I think that we should go ahead and go into the next principle. We're about halfway through here. I think that's a good amount. Anybody else who has done the exercise and would like to share, there will be plenty of time in the breakout rooms. And I encourage you to share. I encourage you to get some feedback on your picture of your ideal self, and use this as a continually evolving project. For anybody that has not done it yet, I would recommend doing it. It was a positive experience for me. So, all right. So this week's topic, this week's principle: analyze temporary defeat, no matter of what nature or cause, and extract from it the seed of an equivalent advantage. Now that's set up as an imperative. There's another formation of it in the book that, and it's formed a couple of different ways, and I've heard it many different ways, but it's something like, in every disadvantage, there is the seed of equivalent advantage, or in every adversity, there is the seed of equivalent advantage. So, what is temporary defeat as opposed to permanent? Why would this be framed in this way? Analyze temporary defeat. Alex, any thoughts on temporary defeat?
I mean, it seems to me it's just a permanent defeat is something that is no learning amount could take back what you lost. And like, for example, I think would be a mindset change, right? So it'd have to destroy your mind in a way that you wouldn't be able to come back and grow from it. You would have to have some type of defeat that damaged you in a way that growth just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the only permanent defeat I can think of is death, but I can also see maybe even wasting time. But so, okay.
Well, for example, some traumatic experience, psychological harm, which just happens to, or physical harm, that just makes somebody disabled from, obviously, of course, in any of these situations, maybe there's a way to get around it. You can change what you're looking for. You can find a way to incorporate it. But my point is that going to happen, I guess?
Yeah, and that's back to the practical versus theoretical question that you and I tend to talk about. So I think about the way that, well, okay, so a couple of things there. First, I think we should separate out finding the seed of equivalent advantage from defeat and erasing the experience of defeat. Because you mentioned, trauma or traumatic damage. And I don't think this principle says everything can be undone. I was listening to somebody recently who was talking about this idea of an undue function in life, that a lot of young people who have grown up with computers also have the idea that in life you can undo something, like you can undo some sort of harm by reparation. And that's actually a relatively new idea that a lot of older people don't think of it that way. They think of restoration rather than undoing, right? And that's not undoing damage, that's restoring, or that's finding the seed of equivalent advantage. And I think that especially in the case of something like psychological trauma or traumatic injury or disease or something like that, this principle is not claiming that you can undo the harm from those things. It's saying those things do not have to be a net negative on your life, that for whatever negative effect they had, you can extract equivalent advantage. But extraction is also not easy. So I think that's an important point to make here. Did you want to say anything about that before I move on to my next question?
No, I would agree. I just want to, I guess I want to make the point that I feel like whenever any type of self-help type topic is addressed, I always have the urge to point out the practicality of certain things and the exposure to the right people, communities, information, and at the right times creates the ability to have the discussion that we're having and to take these seeds of equivalent advantage from defeat. So it's almost that thing. It's almost like that urge that I have to fight people when they say, "Oh, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps," right? And I'm like, you need to have certain things in place to be able to do that. You know what I mean? So I guess there's a certain compartmentalization that I have when I talk about these things. It's the supposition that not everybody is at the right time and place to be able to deal with that. So that's just my caveat, and I can let go of it.
And I think that's compatible. I don't think that.
I agree.
I think that's compatible with what we're saying. I got 2 messages in the chat. Yeah, so Julie mentioned the advantage can be that you are stronger. I totally agree. I think that for many defeats, the advantage is you have the experience of getting back up. And maybe defeat is, I like adversity in the place of defeat, because often, there are things that I would consider adverse that I would not consider defeats, where had I not had the wherewithal to extract some advantage, they would only have been adverse. And there are things like that I've put myself through on purpose that you know what I'm thinking of. So a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, Alex and I did a 50-mile essentially hike event in 19 hours and 5 minutes. And that was physically probably the most adversity that I've ever gone through. And I think that, there's so much to be gained psychologically from having gone through voluntarily an event like that. To be honest, I think that's why we did it.
Yeah, that's my biggest example of that, because I feel like it's taken a year and a half for me to extract the seed of equivalent advantage, right?
Yeah.
Because that sucked, right? Those last 10 hours were pretty awful,
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So there's a principle that I want to move into here that and it's the principle of taking ownership. I think this is especially hard in personal defeat or personal adversity, or in like a team leadership type setting. But I want to talk about the role of taking ownership in the face of defeat. I think often we have this psychological response to defeat where, we all know what I'm getting at here. The idea of taking ownership for defeat shifts the locus of control inward. And it's that Stoic principle of, rather than like blaming outside forces on things that I'm feeling disturbed by, let me shift the control to me, and first of all identify what's in my control and what's not. Take ownership of the fact that if there were things in my control that I could have done differently that I didn't, and now this is the situation. But more specifically, what can I do now in light of those facts? And I think that's extracting advantage. I think the idea of taking ownership, I think that's a really salient point. I think everybody hopefully knows what I mean when I say taking ownership of something. Like your team at work loses some sales that they thought they had. What do? Do you blame the guy who, forgot the client's name? Do you blame your boss for not setting things up right? Do you blame the person that you were in charge of for not following your instructions? No. You take ownership. You say, I should have given better instructions to the person beneath me. I should have given better information up to the people in charge of me. I should have been more aware of my coworkers and checking in to make sure that the client specific details that we're working on, everybody's on the same page with. Those are things that you can control. And even if you cannot control the past, which, I'm not saying ruminate, that's a totally different thing. Even if you can't control the past, what you can do is use that knowledge and use that ownership analysis of failure to change how you fail and ultimately succeed in the future. And that's something that takes a lot of practice. That's something that's definitely not easy. I know Jeff, for example, has a bunch of, not to call you out, Jeff, don't worry, I'm not calling on you, has a bunch of experience training and teaching leaders. And he and I have had conversations about leadership and this principle of ownership, and just how much this is such an important principle in the team setting. Well, it's also an important principle in the personal setting. You can do that exact same thing of taking ownership for things in your own life. And I think that's how you extract advantage from adversity. I think to me, that's the biggest mechanism. I mean, are there other tools or mechanisms that you can think of to do that are effective?
Well, yeah, I think we have whole systems set up to encourage and facilitate this learning from defeat. For example, the whole premise of teacher-student relationships in education is set up to create adversity in mental or whatever type of tasks you're doing, cognitively difficult things, in which the student is participating in it and hopefully failing at some things, and there's a mentor there to help guide them and show them what these seeds of advantage are, to help point them towards what they need to learn from it. And I think a lot of people talk about school should teach you how to learn, not just all these arbitrary facts, right? And I think that's kind of what they're getting at. We should learn by example from teachers and by like assimilating from our peers and from community to how to, when we fail or face adversity or need to solve something, how to find what's relevant to learn from it and what's irrelevant, what needs to change and what needs to stay the same. Is it just a dice roll and we just happen to roll a bad dice and actually nothing needs to change? It's just, that's how reality is. Some things don't work out. Is there something we could do better? Is there something that we're totally blind to? And having another person to help you have an extra pair of eyes, especially somebody who's experienced in the topic or the area, is super useful. So I guess, do you have any intuitions about how we learn to do that for ourselves? When, because I agree 100% with the taking ownership, and the more stuff you take ownership and responsibility for, the more failure and adversity you can have, and the more you can learn and grow. But how do we point out which nuggets to take out and which are not as important?
I think that's where, in my opinion, the importance of having other people in your life that you're working with and around comes into play. I think that when you have people who, to be honest, this is what friends are for, to help you to go. I'm going to go back to some Daniel Kahneman terminology, system 1 and system 2. Your reactions, your automatic thinking is system 1. System 2 is your deliberate, more slow thinking. A lot of times our reactions and scripts in response to failure are system 1 processes. And in order to learn from them, you need your system 2 to kick in. However, unless you already have the habit of shuffling things from system 1 to 2, which even if you have that habit, it's not going to be perfect. You need other people to reflect back to you what your system 1 is doing so that you can put it into system 2 and think about it. You need people to reflect back to you what your reactions and actions and interaction with the world looks like from another perspective so that you can sort of system 2-ize it, reflect on it, and make those adjustments, extract the advantage. In whatever capacity you can, getting feedback from the outside world, from friends, mentors, anybody, any opportunity you have to do that, I think is very important. I want to open up, before we do the exercise, I want to open up to the audience. If anybody has a question about this topic or questions, they're the two kinds of questions only. Number 1, questions about what we just talked about from us. And number 2, questions for discussion in the breakout rooms. So questions only if people have them. We'll start with Shrikant.
I had a question about the terminology. The defeat, that word defeat, implies failure and a failure of an action combined with kind of an internal sense that I have been defeated. So I very much prefer the term failure because it puts the focus on the particular action and it drives attention to this. So do you think that defeat or failure a better way of thinking about this issue?
Yeah, I think that actually may depend on who is taking this in. And that's why I mentioned the term adversity, because I think it rings easiest for me when you substitute the word adversity. So that would be analyze temporary adversity, no matter of what nature or cause. And in your wording, analyze temporary failure, no matter what nature or cause. I agree with you. Failure internalizes it and makes it easier to sort of have that light switch moment when it happens and go, oh, right, this is failure. Or this feels like failure. I need to analyze it and extract the seed of advantage. If you're just talking defeat, that feels like something that happens to you. Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. I agree. I'd be curious to see what other people resonate with in terms of terminology.
Failure, I agree with Shrikant. I think failure resonates more. Defeat seems more. I feel like even just the fact that he had to specify temporary defeat kind of makes that point, and not just defeat, because like Shrikant said, I think that's very internalizing and potentially long-term or significant, when I think failure encompasses a lot more.
Yeah. All right. Stephen, you're back on.
Hey, for Alex, I think you mentioned that the more ownership you take for what happens to you, the more you can experience failure. So isn't that only possible if you're honest with yourself? And if so, how does that play a role?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. You have to really keep that principle in mind, and not let a larger volume of failure trickle into your life and start to make you cynical or anything about what's going on. But I think the point I made is important from earlier about it being a self propelled goal, right? Like these responsibilities you take them on voluntarily. So you're asking for it. And the fact that as long as you don't lie to yourself and convince yourself that you didn't ask for them once you fail, does that answer your question?
Sort of, but it seems like failure is an integral part of what Napoleon Hill is talking about, or what we're talking about here. And I'm obviously, like I said earlier, we're human and we're going to make mistakes, but I'm not too sure how that plays a role in achieving success or becoming a better person.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So I'll just use my personal example. The more responsibilities, even in a work setting, I take on, the more little things I'm going to learn, because the more little things I'm going to mess up, right? Oh, I didn't realize I had to do this thing before I did that thing. I've learned something. I understand a larger slice of the pie now. I'm broadening my understanding. I'm seeing more of the types of failures other people experience in different roles, and I can start to learn from them for myself. And that's what I think it is. It's a broadening and just like a expanding web of learning that opens you up, whereas I would have no idea otherwise.
Right.
Things.
Next up is Kaiten.
Oh, hello. Excuse me. Yeah, so sorry, I'm having some audio visual issues.
We can hear you fine if you want to go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the delay. My question was the temporary failure issue. Do you think that in an idealistic scenario, you progress in a linear fashion? You're just, linear, right? And then you have this other one where you have these uh, failures along the way. It's like kind of an oscillatory linear path going up. So do you think that the linear straight path, straight arrow, no failures, is the preferred way, or having all these little adjustments, failures, resets, going back a little, going forward, is the better course in terms of like, you know, human experience, I guess. You know what I mean?
I have a great analogy for that. And this, I'm only going to explain my answer by analogy. And again, this is one I'm curious to hear what other people think. So a dog without teeth is not a nice dog. It's a dog that doesn't have the opportunity to be mean or nice. It has no teeth. A dog with teeth that is nice to you has the opportunity to be nice. I think failure, life with success with no failure, is sort of empty success. I think that there's some value to the struggle aspect of it, the failure aspect of finding success. Maybe that analogy was slightly off, but that's all I got.
I think that's spot on. That's exactly what I would have. I just had it as like if you're not failing, you're not doing difficult enough things. It's like you're not challenged, right? It's if you're in school and it's too easy, you go to the AP classes, right? And then maybe you do a little, fail a little bit. So I think your potential is too high. And that was a struggle for me. I would set the bar too low so that I didn't have to experience failure and suffer with those emotional repercussions. And therefore, I grew significantly more slowly.
Yeah. It's also, if you are not experiencing failure, I think that actually is a failure in and of itself, and it's a failure to reach. If you're moving smoothly and seeming to find success with no adversity or challenges, I think that's a failure of reach. I don't think you're reaching high enough. So with that, yeah. Okay. I want to get through a couple more questions. Kevin and gang, you guys are it for questions, and then we will move on to the exercise. We'll do the breakout rooms, discussion, bada bing, bada boom. It'll be good. Kevin.
Oh, thank you, Chaz. I got a little bit different perspective. I would get you guys' input. I would understand life is a journey of learning. It's not just competition. If I learn from it, either failure or success, I will be always a winner rather than a loser.
Mm-hmm.
So no one can defeat me unless I give up or admit it's my failure. What's your guys?
Yeah, and that's a I think that's compatible. I think that's an attitude shift. I don't think that's incompatible with what we're saying. I mean, that's almost the automatic attitude version of what we're saying, that like win or lose, if you're learning, you're winning. Well, that's what we're saying. Like win or lose, learn from it. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're already there. I mean, in some sense. All right, gang.
Yeah, I think this is quite similar to what we learned. A landmark is talking about breakthrough and breakdown. Every time you break through, then you will break down at a certain point. And it's just like Jordan Peterson talking about where the growth point is between the order and chaos. And when we challenge ourselves at that boundary, that's a growth area. If we don't challenge ourselves, if we never have any failure, then that means you're not challenging enough. But I think the culture is don't challenge yourself too much, so you you cannot recover. So you still have to between the lines. So I really enjoyed this talk. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. All right, let's go through the exercise for this week. And I'm going to give you guys 2 pieces of it that are, not written on the meetup page. And I'm trying to decide whether we should keep this, just for the people who make it through the whole discussion, it'll be maybe we'll make it public. We'll see. Either way, you guys are the exclusive test audience. So let me read the exercise first, and then I'll give you the new part. So the exercise goes as follows. Find an example of defeat or failure from your life and analyze it using one or both of the following systems. And then identify the seed of equivalent advantage. And I give two analysis systems. There's sort of a post-mortem method for analyzing defeat, failure, adversity, which is, why did I get the result that I did? You can ask why down to 5 levels. What could I have done differently? And what could I commit to in light of this? Action steps. And then there's the 3 piles method. And this, I learned this from actually backpacking. So when you go on a backpacking trip, you're trying to save weight, especially if you're doing ultralight backpacking. And so it's really important to do this analysis after your trip to make sure that you're not overpacking or underpacking. But when you unpack your bag, you put all of your gear into 3 piles. And you can do this with analyzing, some sort of failure. So pile 1 is, what did I bring on the trip with me that really helped? So, even though I have failed or faced adversity, what tools did I bring to the table? What attitudes did I come with that actually helped me and maybe made it so that my failure wasn't as bad as it could have been? So this is the good pile, or the helpful pile. That's actually a better term for it. This is the helpful pile. And then, what did I bring on my trip? This is back to the backpacking analogy. What did I bring on my trip that I didn't use at all? It was just extra weight and I didn't need it and I don't need to bring it next time. So for failure, that could be something like, what did I do that I caused some of my own failure here? I caused myself to experience more adversity than I needed to. So that's pile number 2. And then pile number 3 is, what did I do that didn't necessarily help me, but that I'm going to keep doing? And now in backpacking, this is like your contingency plans. This is putting extra things in place, like your first aid kit that you didn't end up using, but you should probably bring a first aid kit backpacking, right? So, and I think that may be the hardest step with failure. And that's sort of an advanced analysis. You don't even necessarily need to have that pile, but for our purposes, that pile is, what did I do that didn't help me, but that I will continue to do? So maybe it didn't hurt me, or it only hurt me a little bit, but the fact that I had my backup plan, the fact that I had my contingency or whatever it was, is something that I will do again. And now here's the secret portion of it that I think is going to make this week doing this exercise a little bit better. Try to voluntarily face something that you can put through this analysis this week. Try to find something that is a little extra adverse, or a little extra failure-y for you to do this week, and then immediately after, go through this analysis. Now, this is going to start to feel, if anybody's ever done CBT for something like social anxiety, this is going to start to feel like the social anxiety CBT technique of like going out and exposing yourself to something that makes you anxious, and then immediately analyzing things like thought patterns and behaviors in the moment that were helpful or not helpful. It may feel a lot like that, but this is with failure, any failure. So this is the super secret special part. Go and volunteer for this. And if you do that, and you come next week and you say, I did the super secret special version, or I volunteered for an experience of failure this week and I analyzed it, I'm going to put you first in line to talk about it if you want. So that's the exercise. And here's what we'll do. Let's all go through it really quickly. I'll guide you through it. We're going to do it in 5 minutes. And then we're going to discuss our results of our sort of first round test of this in the breakout rooms. So 5 minutes on the timer. Hopefully everybody learned from last week to have something with which to write and on which to write. And brainstorm for this first 30 seconds. What is an example from my life of defeat or failure or adversity? Could be recent, could be less recent. I think if it's a longer time away, you should pick something major. But some experience of adversity. All right, I've got one. I wrote it down. Hopefully you do too. If not, you can catch up. And I'm going to choose this 3 piles method. If you're choosing the other method, good luck. This is my favorite. So pile number 1, what did I do that helped me? Now I'm answering that question real quick. We're going to get done with this faster than 5 minutes. You'll see. It's easy. All right, we're going to move on to the next question. You can always go back and add more. What did I do that hurt me in this? All right, and in the last minute and a half, either what did I do that didn't help me, but that I will continue to do, or switch to one of the questions from the other method and see if that's more helpful for you. 5 minutes. I don't know about you guys, but I had more to write. It's hard to complete in 5 minutes, but I at least got something, and I feel like I already benefited from it. So here's what we're going to do. We will split into breakout rooms, and the topic for discussion is, what did you get from this exercise? And if you're going to do the super secret, sneaky special version and volunteer for some failure this week, maybe discuss some plans for how you can approach it, where you can find some failure, and how you can almost pre-plan your extracting seeds of advantage. So with that, thank you everyone for once again coming and listening to The Switch. Thank you to everyone listening to this as it goes out on YouTube and in the podcast version. Really appreciate being able to do this. I love Outwitting the Devil. I love having these conversations, and I love talking with you guys about them. So until next time, Shrikant, take it away.
Excellent. So folks, I've set up the breakout rooms. We're going to do breakout rooms for exactly 20 minutes. And then we are going to come back, talk about both our experience of doing this exercise, our takeaways from the meetup. And you get to ask one question. I'll put one question on the table, and we'll have a general discussion about failure. Starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. All right, so everybody is here. So it's time for takeaways and questions. So what we're trying to do now is try to be brief. Try to say, what are you walking away with? What did you learn? That's number one. And second, you can put a question on the table. This is a question that is still in your mind, the most important question on your mind. You can do both those things. You can do one of them, or you can say skip. Once everybody has had a chance to do that, and do that very quickly, I will collate all of that, and we will talk about failure. Okay. So it's going to be Victor, William, and Dave next. Victor, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much. And one thing I really picked up is, as I was saying in the breakout session, I think Alex mentioned something like to have an ideal that is, in a way, in spirit, that is unattainable, which gives us a chance to try harder, to take that leap into the potential. I really love that.
Excellent.
Yeah. So my question would be the same thing I was saying in the breakout room. We cannot separate ourselves from whatever has happened to us, either success or failure. Meaning, so it's better to analyze it as is, without cushioning the definition of it, if it's a defeat or failure. So if it's a failure or if it's a defeat, we have to analyze it at that level, not to cushion it. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how, I'm open to hear about it though.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Victor. Next up is William, Dave, and Joe. William?
Yes, great presentation. I know when I did the exercise, thinking back at my failures, the more I thought about them, they really weren't failures at all. They were things that I just did really poorly, or I embarrassed myself, or I looked foolish. And so that got me thinking, if I have a hard time identifying true failures, that must mean that I'm not taking enough risk. So that's my big takeaway. Thanks.
Excellent. So high goals, enough risk. Okay, next up is Dave, Joe, and Gene. Dave?
Shrikant, I can't take credit, but what occurred to me is that some adversity leading to a seed of something great is 52 living ideas. your thing that, you've told us how it transformed, but something wonderful came out of adversity.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Next up is Joe, Jean, and Jeff. Joe?
Some of the things that I actually I'm taking away from this is just some of the general principles that have occurred in multiple failures. And usually they're attitude related. So that I recognize that, whether I become, I start to let my thoughts dictate my actions, which is something the book, calls out pretty clearly. And the thing that I recognize about that, it's mostly complaining about a situation. So as far as identifying failures, I definitely have failures, like flat out failures. Nothing good came out of it. But I also have things that I didn't do as well as I would like to in the past. I guess my question would be, how do you determine in the next week, like the right level of exposure, like to a failure, like, what type of challenge would make most sense for over a week's period to come back and to have a meaningful conversation next week? Because I think that, most of my challenges are, a little bit longer term.
Okay, excellent. Next up is Jean, Jeff, and Raymond. Jean?
Yeah, we have a great discussion. So I share with the group. I think the problem with the failure is because we only have one choice in our life, and we can't comparable like 3 different choices what the result will be. Maybe one will be better than the other. So the choice you choose, you don't know which one, maybe you choose a different choice, you'll be more successful compared to the one you choose. That's one problem. I think it's to define failure. Another thing is, I don't recall a lot of failure. Maybe I'm too optimistic. And also I think if I'm not died, I can keep trying, this way doesn't work, the other way will work. So if I do see obstacles on my way when I have some ideas, but it will always work out eventually at different ways. So I think maybe obstacles is another way to define as failure. So that's my takeaway.
Excellent. Thanks, Jean. Next up is Jeff, Raymond, and Mushki. Jeff?
Thanks, Shrikant. So I want to build on something that Joe said. So, Joe, if I heard you correctly, you said, I've had some failures that were just outright failures and no good came from them. And I've certainly had some failures in my life that I didn't think any good was going to come from them. But in virtually every one, I can, I'm far enough removed from it, or I've had some other experiences in that area since then, where things that I learned from those experiences, no matter how catastrophic or devastating they seemed at the time, they have produced some pretty significant returns on investment. And they say one of the proverbial sayings is never waste a good crisis. For me, I would say that the School of Hard Knocks has a very expensive tuition, and once having paid it, that I really should try to learn whatever it might have been trying to teach me, and to the extent I can, try and learn the right stuff from it that might make me wiser so I could help somebody else, or might potentially make me wiser so I can help myself the next time anything similar comes along. And I know you think that way too, and so I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
Okay.
But that's what I'm thinking this evening.
Thanks, Jeff. Next up is Raymond, Mushki. Raymond, go ahead.
Yeah. So from the breakout room, something came to mind about why a great deal of failure may exist for myself and maybe other people. And I think personally, from my experiences and in general, really fear of conflict is what drives most failure, and fear of making other people unhappy. Something that resonated with me a long time ago was something that, it sounds kind of tropish given what, everyone knows about pop culture and whatnot, but something that Aleister Crowley said, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So I, really feel that anytime in my experience that I've really done what I felt, despite what other people have thought, despite, the element of being perceived as selfish or whatnot, I've been more, quote, successful regardless of whether the whole situation failed or not. So really, I mean, the goal, I think, of learning from failure should be not to live by another person's definition of what failure is necessarily, and not to be afraid of another person's judgment of your failure, or even a group's judgment of your failure, or even to do something unconventional that the whole group might think that you've embarrassed yourself or that you failed at, because you've learned something from that, and you've done something despite what other people have thought you might not have accomplished. So
Thank you. Excellent comments, Raymond. Next up is Mushki. Perfect
Hello.
Young. Mushki, go ahead.
Yes, great talk. I had a few thoughts. I was thinking, like actually just before today, I was thinking about rewriting our life story in general. Like I countered an exercise where you can rewrite your life story. First, come up with the theme of your life story, title of it, if it was a movie or a book, and kind of discuss all the main events of your life. What is the theme? And rewrite it. I can rewrite it. Because I keep telling myself a new affirmation. I am the hero in my story, because I think a lot of us have a victim mentality. And when we have a victim mentality, we can't really even do things that would lead to failure, because then it would enforce, I'm a victim, especially if we don't have an internal locus of control and we're always attributing things to outside circumstances, which having a victim mentality is. So becoming the hero in our story allows us to rewrite our life story. And so the exercise we did today would be, one part of rewriting my life story, one circumstance.
Thank you, Mushki.
You're welcome.
You had something more to quick to add?
Yeah, just I think it's important to do, for one, what I do for myself. I do affirmations every day besides meditation. So I spend a few minutes every day.
Let's keep on the topic of this meetup,
Yeah.
because I don't want to go too far, because what I'm trying to do at this stage is I'm trying to take everybody's observations, and then we are going to look at what is common to all of them, and we are going to discuss some of the
Okay, no problem.
Next up is Perfect App, I think Bianc, Marco, and Cotton.
So I think like my failure is trapped by negative feeling sometimes, and sometimes I stuck there and I cannot get out. So my question is, what can I do when I'm trapped in this kind of situation?
No, can you repeat that? I'm not sure I got it. Can you repeat the question?
My failure is trapped by negative feeling, and sometimes I stuck my negative feeling and I cannot get out.
Got it.
So my question is, what
How
can I do? Yeah, when I'm stuck in this type of, this situation.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Next up is going to be Marco, Cotton, and Priya. Marco?
Yeah, my two biggest takeaways were embracing failure and experiencing it as a challenge rather than so kind of like seeing it as a positive than a negative.
Mm-hmm. It's a positive. Okay, excellent. Next up is Cotton, Priya, and Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for 52 living ideas, because given just going through life, and then I'm like, when everything is splat, I just dial in and wonderful insights every time. And the failure, like you know, I was stultified for months and months to make the correct decision. And things that Jeff and Jing said, just it's okay, fail. It's all right. Just make the decision. So thank you again.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
group.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Prajan. It's always wonderful to have you here. Next up is Priya, Mike, and Kevin. Priya?
Hi, thank you. I the take there's I think the takeaway from the break room is to like endure this failure. And I was just expressing to the group that I have adversity to the failures. So it kind of dovetailing what Perfect App was saying. How do you, when you have that adversity to failure, then how do you kind of go towards it? Because I heard like what some of the other speakers had said, that going through life without not failing or taking the risk is is not worth living at all. But then if your end goal is to succeed and feel happy, losing all the time or losing sometimes for the sake of learning, and someone else pointed out that sometimes the defeat might be more painful than our learning. I know I'm facing failure and defeat as I'm going through my life, but it just seems, why shouldn't we, not, what I want to figure out, why should we face adversity? Why not just live? I'm not satisfied, I guess, with the like living the fullest when you're actually, and you grow through it through the other. It's not sticking to me. I'm just wondering.
Wonderful. Beautifully put. We'll deal with that question. Next up is Mike, Kevin, and Julie. Mike?
Every single event, every single project has aspects of failure and success. And and when you finish it, you should, or at intermediate checkpoints, you should go through shall we say, an after-action review to say what could have been done better, what we need to do to mitigate things. Now, I've been kind of doing this for everything I've done, at least implicitly, over the years, and this thing of analyzing, learning from failure, kind of gives an outline, and I would like to kind of generalize that outline to what you would do for individual efforts, what you can do to mitigate things that are real disasters, and what you do when you have a 30-person or 100-person project that's going down the tubes to mitigate it. Now, I use an example that Linux, for example, is on release 30.7. There are 100,000 bugs in it, but yet it's considered a success. And some of those bugs are going to be fixed in 30.8, and some of those bugs aren't going to be fixed until release 99.
Mm-hmm.
And so how that's managed is a special instance of what we've been talking about tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. It's a good kind of broadening of the context of looking at it at an organizational level. Next up,
the unexamined life is not worth living. A special case of that.
Next up is Kevin, followed by Julie.
Thank you. Today I clicked with a five minutes exercise every time chairs. See something clicked very quick, make me think quicker and deeper. For my takeaway, life has some up and down. What I would learn from my failure is from my past experience and other people start how to deal with adversity. We easy to work with something successful, a normal life. When adversity come, it's hard. Yeah, I have to learn something from.
Mhm. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Julie.
Hi. Tony Robbins did some work on, he studied people that were living successful lives, fulfilled. And he said people have myths about success. And one of them being that people think that there's a goal and like a plane takes off to Hawaii and goes straight to Hawaii, but rather in reality, the plane takes off and it goes over the center line and recorrects. And it certainly doesn't let fear of failure keep it on the runway. And that's been my life, trying to be safe. And the truth really does set you free. That was helpful back then. And these calls are very helpful because people are so transparent that I see how much I still operate off of this lie that I'm different than everyone else. No one else has awkward moments. No one else has moments of hard decisions. And it's just a relief to find out I'm not that different. And I'm on my way to trying to find who I am authentically. I went to reason for my answers early because that was something safe. I could depend on that. That hasn't worked well for me, making all my decisions on the basis of that. So I'm trying to explore intuition and find out my authenticity at this point in life. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. So what I want to do is I want to tell you a story first, and then I'm going to put together everything. These are just fantastic comments. And it's great that we can actually talk at this level. So this is an interesting story. Massimo had sent an invitation out about a couple of years ago that there was a high school holding a very special event. This is just high school. And they had invited all kind of philosophers and thinkers of all kinds to come and give presentations. And it was open to anybody. So I went to listen. Massimo was speaking. So were several people. And there was this entire menu of what lectures you could go and attend. And at one point I saw this lecture on Nietzsche on failure. I said, oh, that's excellent. So I went, okay. Now this lecture, this was a very strict format. Each of these sessions had only 45 minutes, okay. And this lecturer was a student from Columbia, okay. He's a very accomplished guy, but he's an academic guy, so he was not keeping track of time. I do these meetups and stuff, so I am very sensitive about time. And he started very beautifully, kind of showing how bad you feel, how defeated you feel with failures, and what it does to your mood, what it does to your body, what it does to your social interaction. And he spent 30 minutes building that up, okay? And I saw these are all young kids, okay? This topic was very interesting to them. So they were like 30 kids. And I saw their faces drooping and just they're going down. I said, I couldn't wait anymore. So I raised my hand and he was very nice. So I said, he called on me. So I said, I wear my failures as badges of honor. So everybody kind of sits up and looks at me. Are you nuts? Okay. So I said, look, if you want to succeed in life, you have to try things greater than your current ability in every direction. That's the only way you're going to build your ability. Just like muscles. If you want to build your muscles, you have to lift a weight more than what you're comfortable in lifting right now. And when you do, you actually lift it until failure. That's how muscles grow, and that's how abilities grow too. And it is by trying various things and failing that you succeed, because success is just like muscles. Success is built on skills. You need to build the skills. If you are afraid of failure, you're never going to build skills. Just like if you're afraid of failure of the muscle, you're not going to be able to build the muscle. So it's as simple as that. If you want to succeed, you need to be completely comfortable with failure. Okay. And the guy, to his credit, he just jumps up and says, look, if I don't get to finish my lecture, this is the end conclusion of it. Because that's what Nietzsche is all about. What does not kill me makes me stronger. That's point that Jean was making. So what I want to do now is I want to run through everybody's point. Okay. So just as Victor said, so I'm going to just rattle through everything, and then I'm going to open it up for comments and questions. Okay. I'm going to try to weave all of these things together. Okay. As Victor said, it's the highness of the goal that matters, because only the stretching is going to build your ability. What you're trying to build is your ability. You're not really, shouldn't be bothered about a particular success. You should be able to build your ability. And if you can't build your ability, the other point I was making during this thing is that, I never regret things that my failure, when I look back and say, okay, I failed. I never regret those. Those are minor. They look very big when it is happening, but when you look at a distance, they are very minor. What you really regret is when you don't try, when you fail to actually make that attempt. That's what you really regret. So I think high goals are critical, and high goals necessarily imply failure, because you won't be able to, if you're always operating on, Cotton talked about a smooth path. Smooth path is a slow path. So it's a question of whether you want to grow. If you decide that you want a smooth path, that means you're going to be almost at the same level of skill that you are. You'll be improving only with small increments. You will never grow fast. So growth approach, failure is a part of that. Again, the point that Gene made, I think Gene's approach is very close to my approach of, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. I really don't care about the failures, so what? I mean, it seems to be, to me, it is like, I tried to do something, it didn't work. Sometimes I can actually fix it in the future and become better. Sometimes you discover that you can't do something, which is also a good thing to know what your limitations are. You can always work with other people. So it's never the end of the world. The next one is kind of using adversity in a systematic way. There was another very beautiful point about right level of challenge. And I think order, Jordan Peterson's ideas about order and chaos, that you don't go completely into chaos. You're trying things like, for example, you would not want to lift a weight that will break your ligaments or muscles. That's too much. At the same time, if you're lifting something which is very easy for you, that's also not right. So there is a way of calibrating what you can do. And definitely it needs calibration. How do you see the value of alternate paths? You can choose only some paths. How do you see the value of what you miss? So I think being open to trying out many things and failing many things in a given period of time, you can't make multiple choices. But if you're aggressively trying out things, then you can kind of do half of that. Not as, you can't choose three things at the same time, but if you're quick at making the choices, you can run through these experiments fast enough to approximate things. The next one is, learning from hard knocks, the point that Jeff was making. I think it's a profound point. And really there is, it seems like a high tuition, and if you don't pay the tuition, actually what you get is not education. So you really have to try yourself in order to do something. Fear of conflict with others that Raymond was talking about also is a very big point. Many times it is not really a fear of failure. It is mostly, what will other people think? And that is a complete waste after a period. Like I remember my niece telling me when she was in high school, she said, Shrikant, I don't know what these people are doing. They're all concerned about what other people think, and they don't care about, actually nobody cares about what, they don't really care about other people. So it doesn't matter. So it's like, the way she put it, it's like mirrors in mirrors. Everybody's trying to be the right thing, but nobody has an actual grounding for anything. So the next one is failures due to negative feeling. I think a lot of the failures are, it's two things. There is an actual action happening and your reaction to action. I think the fear of failure is much more much more corrosive than failure itself. It's like fear of fear, that maybe I will feel fear. So something like that. So I think there is a lot of that. And most of the things that are stopping you are inside you. The next one is, what is the purpose of going through all of this? This seems kind of rough. Why not go for the easy path for, just trying to achieve success? It's a question of, whether you want growth or not. It's kind of difference between the fixed mindset and growth mindset. I mean, I would be bored out of my mind if I did not try out new things. I mean, that's just who I am. So I think, and what happens is that over time, for a person who is afraid of failure seems like a big thing. But once you get used to it, it's not that big. I mean, you can always calibrate it and, and handle it that way. The after action review, I think it's a beautiful idea. I think it's worth doing it for everything, even when things succeed. I'm always looking to say, what is going wrong? What can be done better? And you hear very carefully, and you always kind of get feedback from other people on this. So these are the kind of quick thoughts about it. So any kind of general thoughts on failure? So kind of philosophy of failure at the highest level. So you can go ahead and type exclamation mark. I just tried to run through everything quickly, but I'll take anything. So firstly, kind of the necessity of failure for success. Let's talk about that. Jeff, go ahead.
So Shrikant, I actually adopted over time a question that I would ask people when I would interview them when they were applying for a job. I'd ask them to tell me two really important things where they felt they had made a significant mistake or failed, and what did they learn from that? And I would tell them afterwards that what I was trying to find out is the extent to which they learned the right things from their experience. In other words, did they have 10 years of experience or 1 year 10 times?
Mm-hmm.
And also, did they learn the right things from their experience, things that would make them wiser and stronger, more courageous, more thoughtful, give them criteria they could use to help them be successful in the future. Because it's possible to learn things that make you weaker or more scared or more averse to risk and in ways that are not healthy. And so learning the right things is a very important skill.
Excellent. I like Kevin's statement, failure is the mother of success. The other thing I want to say, yesterday, my friend Michael was talking about negative emotions like anger and fear. And one of the brilliant points he made is that many of these negative emotions have evolved in the context, which was far more rougher than the context in which we live. So the kind of anger, for example, looking for target immediately so that you can get all the adrenaline going so that you can act against the tiger. The same anger we have, the same emotional mechanism we have now. But our environment is not that rough. So it is kind of mismatched. I think the same thing is with fear and kind of this fear of failure. It's really when people feel as if, again, I strongly object to the word defeat because it combines a failure with an internal sense of taking that as a personal representation of who you are. And that's why, Alex beautifully pointed out, that's why you use this temporary failure. And yes, there will be like a temporary kind of feeling of it. It can be, but that's a fleeting thing. Next up is Joe.
Just really quickly, this is going to sound a bit trite, but there was a drill in playing basketball when I was growing up that the entire goal of the drill is to put the ball through your legs as quickly as possible, with the idea that you would lose control eventually, and that the goal was failure. Like it was absolutely, and if you weren't achieving that goal, then you weren't doing the drill correctly. So there is this idea where, you know, you're pushing yourself continually to fail. Like, you know, it's, and you get so comfortable with it that you don't necessarily see yourself growing without it. And I think that failure as a goal to a certain degree can be, you know, you don't want to shoot to fail necessarily, but you know, it is an indication that it's just a marker that you are pushing yourself really, really hard. And I want to thank Jeff for his comment earlier that there's always something that you can pull from failure. That was, it was a good reframing for me. I appreciate that.
Excellent. I mean, that's why I think that the intermediate concept is concept of skill building. So what is the basketball player doing, or what is a person doing when they are lifting weight? They are trying to build ability. So what you're trying to build is ability to dribble. And the only way you're going to be able to build that ability is to dribble faster and faster until you fail. And then you kind of go and try it again. Each time your ability will keep growing. Similarly with the weight. So I think the ability is a kind of missing part. Wonderful. All right, folks. So it looks like there are no more questions, but this was a very, very interesting discussion. And I think these are working out so well. You know, Chase and Alex do a fantastic job of putting things on the table, kind of calmly discussing various things. You know, a few questions, and then you have the breakout rooms, and then we can have this great conversation afterwards. And it so happens that I like this book a great deal because it kind of specifies issues with unusual clarity and with kind of unrelenting pursuit of truth, and putting things out there without any couching of words. So it's a very powerful, powerful experience going through it again. And I'm glad to go through this with you. So see you next time. Bye.